What do you think that you've learned about the New York Jets in the first 2 years or so of the Joe Douglas era here?
Nothing. What I wrote down is nothing they do matters if they got Zach Wilson wrong. Like I'm going through the thing. Oh, Jordan Whitehead, nice. Okay, nice move. Oh, look at that. Mekhi Becton comes back. You kind of fix some stuff on the offensive line. Like if I'm just looking at moves in isolation that they've made over the past 2 seasons, specifically in free agency, I'm sure most of them, when I did the analysis, are getting B's or what. Like most of them are totally fine. And it's not going to matter at all. Everyone's going to be gone and everyone's going to be disappointed if the quarterback if he got that evaluation wrong. And so let's see. I mean, they're not like loaded around Zach Wilson, but certainly I think they're competent enough. The offensive line has improved. Maybe you're probably going to add some pass catching help in the draft along with Elijah Moore and Corey Davis. Like there's enough there. I thought Mike LaFleur, when you watch the other quarterbacks play last year, you're kind of like, oh, they're looking a little like this offense looks not bad at all. Like I was kind of impressed with what he was doing last year. And so Wilson was obviously up and down, had more downs than ups. Now it's year 2 and better supporting cast. And like, we just have to kind of sit back and see if he's good or not. I don't know.
The first draft class but that's looks like I totally understand because I feel pretty similarly. The first draft class was a disaster, right? I mean, the Denzel Mims, Ashton Davis part of this, and we'll see what happens with Becton. There's a chance that's just a wash. That was for a different staff, and occasionally that can happen, where now you're trying to put a square peg in a round hole with a new coaching staff, and it just doesn't work out. Other than that draft class, he's done most of the things I'd want a GM to do. Like the signings that they've made this spring, we've talked about them. I think they all make sense. I think they're all reasonable. The guys that they went after, the way that they're shaping this thing, how they've accumulated picks, they have 4 picks in the top 38. So it's not like they're spending all this money in free agency and that's how they're trying to build this thing. They absolutely have chances to find cost control players that impact positions next month. They have 2 top 10 picks. They could come away with after the 38th pick easily with a top shelf cornerback, a real addition to the pass catching core, another high caliber offensive tackle, and a pass rusher. That's not far-fetched, all on rookie deals. Their team has a chance to really go places. I mean, there's a long way for this to go based on the resources that they've had and what they have to tap into. And none of it matters if they get the quarterback wrong.
Yeah.
That's what it feels like. He's done so much right in the process after that first draft. And if they get the quarterback wrong, we're not going to remember any bit of that process.
And then the Mekhi Becton thing is sort of hanging over them also. I mean, I have no idea. Is he going to be their starting left tackle for the entire season next year or not?
Though, if you draft another guy at 4th overall or whatever, and you feel good about that guy, you say, all right, Mekhi, you battle it out for George Fant for that right tackle spot. Jeez. And if he doesn't get it, then you've put yourself in a good spot because of the way that you've accumulated resources. You've given yourself a chance to move on from that and not have it torpedo you. That's what they've done. But again, if you compound that with failing at quarterback, then that wiggle room and that flexibility doesn't really matter.
Yeah, I mean, at least they've, he is in position to at least again, like we mentioned with Tua, it's not to the same degree, but you should be able to get a fair evaluation on him year 1 to year 2, same coordinator, better offensive line, presumably better weapons, even though, I wouldn't say above average weapons. And so you should be able to get a pretty good evaluation on how much he can improve in his second season. And then you would have to make a decision after next year.
I'm curious what their pursuit of Chandler Jones means. Because when you look at it, they have Carl Lawson. He was obviously coming back from the Achilles, which is something to worry about. But they signed John Franklin Myers to that extension. So they have 2 edge rushers making more than $12 million a year. I'm wondering, would that mean more inside snaps for Franklin Myers this year? Are they worried about Lawson's health? That's just one thing that I had in the back of my mind. Like if they're chasing another big ticket pass rusher in free agency or the draft, what does it mean for the guys they have in house? That was the only lingering question I had about that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Right? Obviously, those guys rotate, but still, like you said, historically, you wouldn't commit that many financial resources to three guys who may or may not be on the field at the same time. So I don't know what to make of that. I mean, maybe they're just like, we need good players, and Salah's like, please give me another pass rusher. I need more to work with here. So
I can understand that. And again, Franco Myers weighs 290. I mean, if you want to bump him inside on passing downs, that's fine. So I get that. I'm just wondering what that plan looks like ideally for them. All right, let's stick in New York. Not a ton to talk about here just because they don't have any money to do anything, but I think their outlook and where they are right now is interesting, and that's the Giants. What do you make of the first couple months here of the Joe Schoen, Brian Daboll era in New York?
I mean, I just wrote down they inherited a mess. Like you said, I mean, maybe the least flexibility of any of the teams we talked about.
They have $1 million in cap space.
Yeah. I mean, so there really wasn't a lot they could do. Now, with their draft capital, I mean, that to me is very interesting because they're giving Daniel Jones an opportunity here. They've got picks 5, 7, and 36. Like, I know we're saying this about pretty much every team, but man, if you can trade down and get a pick for next year, like if I'm the Giants, if I'm Joe Schoen, you want flexibility next offseason. How can you achieve that? You want picks, you want stuff to work with next offseason. If Daniel Jones plays well under Brian Daboll, that's a great outcome, but that's not one that I'm counting on, like looking at the next 2 to 3 years. Yes, he's going to be our guy. That would be a massive mistake. And so I want to be in position next February to be like, all right, didn't work out great, but we have moves we can make now in my second season here. So that to me is kind of the key to their draft and really the rest of their offseason. Like you said, there's not a whole lot we can really expect that they're going to do. I don't think from now until week 1, this is kind of their roster aside from the draft picks.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the moves they made. They signed Mark Lewinsky to a 3-year, $18 million deal. That's the splashy move they made in free agency. They also signed Tyrod Taylor to what I call the we're not sold on our starter contract. Teddy Bridgewater got a 1-year version of it. Tyrod Taylor got a 2-year version of it. It's 2 years, $11 million. So we need to throw you in week 7. We feel okay about that. That's that deal. It's the one that like the Teddys and Tyrods and Case Keenums of the world tend to get. But other than that, they haven't done anything. They had $11 million in dead money to cut Logan Ryan. I mean, that's the position that this team is in right now. They had to convince Sterling Shepard to take a pay cut. I mean, they would get $2 million in cap relief if they traded James Bradbury versus cutting him. Like, those are the types of considerations that they've had to take on with the way that this roster looks right now. So next year, they could hit the reset button and they can move on from almost all of those deals as soon as next spring. But for right now, there's just not much for them to do. I would do everything I could to try to find maybe another tackle in the top 10 of this year's draft. And like you said, just try to accumulate more picks, put myself in a position to potentially go get a quarterback next year. That's really all I'd be thinking about.
Yeah, they're a weird team because you go through the roster and they're like players I kind of like. I'm like, Leonard Williams can be a really good player. Ujulari was pretty fun as an edge rusher last year. Oh man, Kadarius Toney actually played last year. He was making some jaw-dropping plays, and I'm going, Bradbury, Xavier McKinney, but it's just so I don't know. Like, I don't know what their goals are. They have a new defensive coordinator. You just have to kind of see what it looks like with these guys. I do think they're one of those teams where you're always trying to identify the team that was kind of in the worst situation the previous year, whether it was coach and GM that could potentially be better because of the upgrade. And, they could be one of those teams with just kind of Daboll's approach offensively compared to how Joe Judge did things last year, and a GM who's being patient. Like, there could potentially be a big gap there, which I know would be a positive for Giants fans.
It wouldn't surprise me for them to have a season that was kind of like the 2017 Bills. We make that comparison with Joe Schoen and this regime and what they're trying to do. That 2017 Bills team had about $30 million in dead cap. They $11 million essentially for Marcel Darius, $5.5 million for Sammy Watkins. They had to move on from some of those expensive players from that previous regime, and they stumbled into a 9-7 season and made the playoffs. They have real players on that team. And I do think that they're going to be put in much better positions, but I also think you can't get intoxicated by that. If you win 9 games or 10 games and stumble into a wild card spot, I think you have to see it with clear eyes next spring and be like, this is not the team we want. This is the team we had to trot out there, but let's see if we can actually hit the reset button this year, because they can. If they want to start over next spring, they can. So I think that's going to be the challenge more than anything else. If they overachieve, what does that end up meaning?
They could have a season similar to what the Eagles had last year, right?
Yeah, that's another good comparison.
Terrible
that's
season.
Another good one.
You had to change it. Head coach, you still kind of have some players who might be okay, and you're playing in a bad division, by the way, which the NFC East is every year. And it's week 17, and you're 8-8, and the winner goes to the playoffs as the 7th wild card team. I mean, yeah, they could have that kind of season.
I absolutely think they could. That wouldn't surprise me whatsoever, because I do think the difference between the offensive coaching that they've had over the last 2 years and Brian Daboll is about as stark as you can get.